Fredonia, New York. Actually, we're in Dunkirk, but we're both here because of Fredonia, sort of. Like, happy to have Bruce Johnstone here, baritone sax extraordinaire, and composer and arranger. And
thank you.
It's been a long way from New Zealand.
It is.
I saw a thing. We were just talking about the little YouTube thing, and apparently one of your students made a comment under it, and he said about Bruce. He gets up every day at 5 a.m. and practices for 3 hours. I'd like to see you do that. Now, is that true?
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Okay.
But I do practice a lot. But I think they're building a myth.
Yeah.
Which is fine if they want to do that. But obviously they must have some idle time that they need to be more deeply involved in.
At this stage in your playing in your career, what do you find is interesting and useful to practice?
I practice things that are hard. I practice tunes that have difficult chord changes, things that don't lay correctly, and they don't lay naturally under my hands. And so I will work them slowly. I mean, back when I was learning giant steps, I practiced it as a ballad, and gradually got where the most comfortable transitions were. And that seems to work for a lot of people. Don Mezza told me that he did the same thing. So I think we all do things that in a similar way, just like that Oriental martial arts thing where people are in the part, doing everything slowly, and then if they get into a fight, and these guys have got control of what they do, and they've done it at a slow speed, so they can then increase.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think it's also probably very useful for playing the rests, because rests are harder to play at slow tempos.
They are. In fact, there's a story about Vito Musso, who was on Benny Goodman's band, and he was having trouble playing a phrase. And Benny said to him, "You're having trouble with the notes?" And he said, "No, I'm having trouble with the rests." which a lot of the kids, I find, have troubles with rests or even with long notes. Notes. A dotted half note can turn into 7 beats or two or less. Yeah, and they just blindly jump ahead.
Yeah.
So constantly have to rein people in and say, you have to count. You have to be aware of where you are.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I'll tell them to do this and that with rests, and then I'll play in a thing like we're doing this weekend, and I'll find that I make the same. It's like I should be listening to myself, like, jumping in too soon, etc.
Oh, it happened to me too.
Yeah. I've been thinking recently, we're a similar age, and I think about the term making it in the music business. Because when we were younger and we wanted to make it in the music business and what that might have meant. Do you remember what that meant for you when you were like a teenager?
Well, it meant being accepted by people who were older than you. When I was 16, I was in the New Zealand Radio Orchestra, which meant I was a government employee at 16. So I would get done with school, take a bus in, and be in the studio with all these guys who were far older than I was. But at that stage, I had essentially made it because I was treated not as a kid, but I was treated as an equal, and that's really important. And the other thing about when people say you're making it, when I look back to the Maynard Ferguson albums that I was on, at the time it was just another day at the office, and it wasn't until several years later when you listen back to that stuff that you realize how special it was and what an impression you had made. And these days I'm getting contacts from people who are a lot younger who have discovered these Maynard Ferguson and Woody Herman jams that I was involved with, and they're contacting me and asking me about reeds, mouthpieces, what was I thinking at the time, what was my concept, how come I didn't sound like a baritone player when I played, and so they're getting in depth with me.
did you have, I mean, let me ask this. Did you have a concept like they think you might have?
I think I probably did. I'd listened to a lot of baritone players when I was a kid on recordings, and for a large part of it, they sounded clunky and clumsy, and certain parts of the instrument were strong and certain parts were weak. And I was listening primarily to, I was drawn to tenor players and alto players. People like Lester Young, who had shaped his sound on a C melody saxophone sound that Frankie Trombauer had. So his sound was lighter. And then Stan Getz, who had listened to alto players when he first played Early Autumn, when he was 18 and had that huge recording. People thought he was playing an alto. So he had control of the top end of the instrument, and that's something that I wanted to do. And because I also idolized Cannonball Adderley, I wanted to bring that same concept. I figured the guy's got the same amount of fingers and the same amount of keys. Why can't I do that, but on baritone? And so a lot of what I did is in the upper register and going into harmonics, but I want it to be as clean as the rest of the notes on the instrument. So you have a pyramid effect. The top end of the horn is like this, and the bottom end is wide. So you get a slightly more edgy sound on the top, and a nice broad bottom, and the middle range is still clear. And so a lot of people thought that I was playing a tenor when I first came to the stage.
Did you ever consider playing the tenor? I'm sure.
I tried. I get a lousy sound out of a tenor.
Yeah.
I basically have an E flat head, I think.
Yeah.
I'm more comfortable playing baritone and alto, although I haven't played alto to the extent that I have played baritone, but I do enjoy it when I do. I play soprano as well.
I like that, E flat head. It is interesting because there's some tunes that just lay so well on an E flat instrument.
Oh yeah.
Depending on what key they were written in, like Misty is just like
it's perfect.
It's perfect.
It's right there. It's right in the middle. With the string group that I'm writing for, I've moved a couple of keys so that I'm playing more at the top end of the horn. For example, East of the Sun, it's usually done in F. I do it in C because when I do a solo intro, and I'm right up the top of the horn in kind of mid to upper tenor range, which has all the clarity in the world, and then I've got all the rest of the horn to play with.
Where did you get the music in New Zealand? Did they have decent record stores and so forth? Was your family musical?
My family was musical. In fact, they told me that 2 weeks before I was born, they got front row seats to a concert by Artie Shaw. And so they used to take me all kinds of places before I was born. And so I was absorbing Artie Shaw at the time. And so they had a huge record collection. There's Artie Shaw and Woody, and in fact my parents were just blown away when I got the job with Woody.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I was listening to Charlie Parker and Coleman Hawkins and Lester and all these, Basie and everybody when I was just a little kid, because there was no TV at the time when I was growing up. And so on rainy days before I went to kindergarten, my parents would just sit me in front of or my mother would sit me in front of the record player and just let me go. But I was listening to a lot of Dixieland as well. Louis Armstrong, Jack Teagarden, and Miff Mole and his Little Molars. Remember that? So it was a really great musical upbringing. My parents were both guitar players and banjo players, and they used to have jam sessions at the house. So I would go to bed and hear all this great stuff being played. But record stores, to a degree. probably a better jazz selection record store than we have now.
Yeah,
In the
that's
States.
something.
But I used to buy directly from the States. I had a subscription to Downbeat magazine. I'd read all these things, and I would also get Voice of America on shortwave radio, and so I would hear all these great things like Art Blakey, Horace Silver, Max Roach, all these wonderful players, and the guy would say, "And this is from their latest album." Bang! So I would write off a letter to my contacts in San Francisco, and I'd get a little package back.
Oh, nice.
So that was nice.
A lot of people have mentioned Voice of America, from Japan and Europe, of course. That was really great.
And I did get to meet Willis Conover
Really?
one time. He was the voice of American Jazz, and I met him in Warsaw, in Poland, when we were with Woody.
Was there a role model for you about a musician who felt that, okay, I have to leave New Zealand, I have to take these stepping stones to get where I want to get?
I think it was a logical progression. I was always setting myself up against people and ranking myself. Where do I fit within the scene? And after I pretty much played with everybody that I admired, and I realized I was being accepted by all these folks, and I would run into players from other countries who would come in, and a bunch of guys from Australia had said, "You should come to Sydney. You know, things should really happen for you." So after hearing this enough times, when I was 21, I said, okay, so I had $1,000 and a return airfare, and went to Sydney. And I was down to about my last $150, and all of a sudden I locked onto a gig, which, strangely enough, was a Dixieland job. And so I was playing clarinet and baritone and alto with this very strange band. It was called the Ray Price Quartet. Ray Price was the banjo player. There was no drums, no bass. The piano player was playing bass lines on keyboard. Ray became the percussion section, and we had a trumpet player. His name was King Fisher. He was an American kid, and his father was Freddie Schnickelfritz Fisher, who there's a YouTube video of him playing Turkey in the Straw, which is absolutely hilarious. And this guy was kind of like a Denver version of Spike Jones. So King had all this Dixieland stuff in his head, and they had a repertoire of stuff that they were doing, which was Dixieland, swing, and even stuff in odd time signatures. We used to do America in 7/4. You know, and he would take great delight in having the audiences clap in 7. And everyone said, "Wow, I'm clapping in 7."
Like unsquare dance.
Yeah, exactly.
Big thing.
Yep. But that was a funny gig, and that was a 6-night-a-week job, and he was kind of a national figure in Australia. So we recorded several albums with him, and we did tours of Northern Australia in the outback, and it was great. So I got to see the country, got to go on the Great Barrier Reef, and
You were making it.
making it, yeah, pretty much. And plus I would play bebop on Sundays.
Oh, nice. Do you remember what you were making? What your salary would have been at the time?
Oh, I think it was maybe about $60 a week, which at the time was pretty good. It was more than a lot of people were making, and I got a car, and I had a nice apartment, and
You were doing what you wanted.
just busy. And from there, it kind of transformed into studio work. And the last year that I was in Australia, I was assistant musical director of a big nightclub called Checkers, which used to have name American acts come through. And I was staff on 4 TV shows. So that was regular, 4 days a week I was doing that. Plus I was doing recording sessions for backup rock things. And it it was pretty much a 7-day-a-week, 18-hour-day existence.
Wow.
And it was great. The money was terrific. And but in making it at that, with that much intensity, meant that you were just completely wiped out all the time. You didn't have time to really develop anything new. So one night I went home and I said to my wife, "Do you want to go to Europe?" And she said, "Yeah, let's go to Europe." I woke up the next morning and said, "Did you say we're going to Europe?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." So we looked at the shipping schedule, and there was a ship leaving a week from then. So we had passports, went down, I sold a bunch of instruments, and got on a ship, went to Europe.
What would you have sold? Stuff that said, I don't need this?
Right, I had 2 soprano saxophones that I sold. They were 100 numbers apart. They were both Selmers, and I kicked myself for dropping these things. One sounded like an English horn, and the other one had a much bigger, more of a jazz soprano sound. So whenever people used to hire me, I asked them what kind of sound they wanted, bring the appropriate instrument. I sold a really good clarinet. I sold a really good alto flute, a really good bass flute, and which I now kick myself all over the place for letting go of.
Yeah.
But
Got
there was just so much plumbing you can carry when you're changing countries. And so, England was okay. It was an entirely different scene. There was nothing much established, and the contacts that I had over there had known me as a studio player, and they weren't. So when people were offering me jobs, they said, "Oh no, he's a studio player, he's not a jazz player."
Mm.
So I had to, just a minute, we got to do that. And there was also another odd faction in England. I was playing with, I was subbing for John Surman on a South African group called the Brotherhood of Breath. Very avant-garde, very violent kind of music, but they were good players. And Alan Skidmore was playing tenor on it. A wonderful alto player, African alto player, by the name of Dudu Bukwana.
Dudu Bukwana.
He's kind of like an African version of Ornette Coleman. Fabulous player. And so they were going to do the Berlin Jazz Festival, but they hadn't mentioned anything to me about it. And I said, "So am I going to Berlin with you?" And they said, I said, "No." And I said, "Oh, why?" I said, "Oh, because you sound too much like an American." And I thought, coming from New Zealand, isn't that the object? And they wanted somebody who didn't sound, or didn't have that Americanish sound, which I guess I had.
Which means what?
I have no idea. I just didn't go to Berlin with them, and I didn't play with them anymore. But I played with some of the newer avant-garde, new age rocker kind of guys like Brian Ferry, and I was holding down a 6-night-a-week gig in Nottingham, of all places. I would have to drive from London and stay over a couple of nights and playing in just a big dance band, but we would just do all kinds of stuff.
And this was what year? Years?
60 or probably 69, 70.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got sick of that. And one day I went home to my wife and said, "I think it's time we got out of here." So we moved, burned a few bridges, and went to France.
Were you hearing the Coltrane and the sort of avant-garde, progressive stuff that was going on in the 60s? Were you hearing it and listening to it?
I was listening to it. I admired Coltrane. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, but I didn't want to copy him because he was so unique, and I didn't want to, make the image a pale version of what Coltrane was doing. A lot of what he was doing was beyond my understanding at that point, and I had needed to just sit down and listen to it. I was also familiar with Albert Ayler, who was just ripping and tearing. But I was more back in the tradition. I was kind of steeped in the Lester Young style of playing. And one of my favorite tenor players was Dexter Gordon, who was just terrific. I mean, I had a ton of his albums, and I used to like the kind of sarcastic way that he played. And when he would do that, and you would hear these little phrases on all of his recordings, but he could interpret a ballad like nobody's business. And so after being in France and then kind of working my way up through Europe, I wound up in Copenhagen, and guess who's on the schedule for Maynard? Dexter. And also I scouted around. Ben Webster was also living there at the time. Sahib Shihab was living there. Kenny Drew was living there. And there were so many wonderful bass players there. Niels Henning was there. Great player by the name of Bo Stief, who was still there and we still communicate. And a guy by the name of Mats Vinding, who I used to use a lot. And a drummer by the name of Alex Reel, who had played with Bill Evans, recorded with Dexter, and he's still one of the best drummers I've ever heard. So I kind of stumbled into the scene by having the nerve to go up and ask Dexter if I got to sit in with him.
I think I read about this. Did he put you through your paces, sort of?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell me about that again?
Well, he had, I asked him if I could sit, and he said, well, you got any chops? And I said, well,
Those
they
were
come,
his
they go.
words. Do you have any chops?
Yeah.
Okay.
Meaning, can I get around the horn? And I said, well, there are some days I do, some days I don't. And he was pretty bleary. He'd been drinking pretty hard. So he said, do you know Stella by Starlight? And I said, yeah. And he said, in A, which puts me in F sharp. And I wasn't about to let this go, so I said, sure. And so we went on stage, and Dexter started out Stella by Starlight and played a long chorus. I mean, many choruses. Quit in the middle of the chorus and went, I thought, you son of a bitch.
This was definitely on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Especially to stop in the middle of a chorus.
Absolutely. He wanted to know if I knew where I was.
Now Stella is in B
Usually
flat,
B flat.
isn't it? So yeah.
So it's now a half step.
Yeah.
And so he played brilliant solo. But I was also doing the ugly fan thing. I was standing on stage thinking, wow, this is Dexter Gordon. I've played all his records. But the rhythm section was great. It was Niels Henning was playing bass, and Kenny Drew was playing piano. And they knew what Dexter was doing, and Kenny Drew just kind of rolled his eyes, and he walked me through it. The chord changes, every change was like riding on rails. There was no surprises, everything was just nice, and it was a delight, absolute delight. And Dexter called me the next day, and I don't know how he found out my phone number, because I was staying in a house that a Danish woman was, she would rent rooms. And so he was very nice, and he said, can you cover for me? I have a gig in Aarhus that I have to back out of. Can you do it? And I said, sure, I'd love to. And he said, good, because I told him you could. So after that, we were friends.
I'm sorry, I could just hear his voice too, his slow way of talking.
Oh, yeah.
Down here.
Oh, yeah. And so after that, we were friends. We played a lot together. And he didn't realize that I was picking his brains and getting a lot of his stylistic things and putting them on my instrument. Things that he and Ben would do, they would learn the lyrics to everything. And these guys knew the introductions to most standards. Things that have just been lost in the mist of time, and everyone just plays the chorus. Dexter could stand up. In fact, he wouldn't announce tunes a lot of times. He would just get up and say, a country dance was being held in a garden, and he'd recite the entire lyric of Polka Dots and Moonbeams, and then it just, and it was magical because it engaged the audience to understand the story that he was telling, and then playing it, and you could feel it the whole way. And the sound, just the clarity of sound, everything was solid from the bottom of the horn to the top of the horn. There was nothing sounded strained, and which was something I'd always heard with baritone players. The top end was always just always dragging it up with your lip.
Yeah.
And so I watched him a lot as he was doing it, and he was always really, really relaxed. And so I thought, well, let me just put the Dexter Gordon thing in my head. And when I played, the clarity came. And so that was a really, really valuable stuff that I was getting from these guys. And Ben Webster was also another one who, because he wouldn't fly, the Copenhagen Radio Orchestra would send me out with him. So we'd ride trains and buses and boats and things to get to the gig. And he would just sit around and talk to me. And he'd tell me about how Lester Young's mother used to make them sandwiches before he and Lester went down swimming, and just real stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought he was just a charming guy. He also made the best coffee in Copenhagen. He'd call me up and say, "Hey, want to come over for coffee?" And I'd zoom over, and we'd sit and chat and play a little.
You can't buy that kind of stuff.
I know.
That's great.
I know, and I just feel really, really fortunate that I was able to stumble into this.
Mm-hmm.
But because of their influence in Copenhagen, players there moved up to their level. And when you have somebody who can really play, you want to come up to that level. And so I was doing that. The bass players and the drummers and pianists all were trying to do that. And the legacy of what those guys left after they passed is still really solid in Denmark.
Was there any racial issues at the time? There.
Yes, I was threatened once on stage by a black guy who had some brass knuckles. And he came up screaming at me, "How dare you play my music?" And everybody, I think he was just there on vacation. But he'd had a little much to drink, and all of a sudden he resented the fact that a white guy could play blues. And so the Danes kind of chilled him out. I think Dexter slowed the guy down too, but he was ready to take a swing at me because all of a sudden he thought that I was taking a cheap shot at that style of music. But yes, there was some racial issues, not in Denmark, other than these guys who would come in. But yeah, in the States there was, when I finally got here with Maynard.
Does it go under the heading of reverse?
I guess so. Yeah, it's just a very strange thing. I'm glad it's kind of blown over now. But at that time, there were still factions, and when I moved to New York, after I left Maynard, I would get calls from a couple of black clubs in Harlem, and they would send somebody from the club to meet me at Grand Central Station, and this guy's job was to stick with me the whole time that I was there. He would drink with me, he'd hang out with me, he was very protective if anybody approached me, and then he would escort me back to Grand Central Station at the end of the gig. And it was a little unnerving, but
He was like being your bodyguard.
yeah. So it was unnerving.
Yeah.
And also, I had started a fusion group called New York Mary, along with Rick Patron and Joe Corsello. And we had 2 albums for Arista, and they did rather well. They were both hit pick of the month in Billboard and Cashbox. And usually when they do that, they say, best track is. they listed all tracks on both albums. So the second album, Arista sent out in a plain cover, just as a promo, and it was getting airplay like crazy on all black radio stations from Boston to Washington to Chicago, and then all of a sudden it got pulled overnight, and it was because somebody showed up with a picture of five white guys on the front, and that was the feeling of the times.
You mean they were playing it, but they didn't know that you were an all-right band?
Yeah. Isn't that unnerving?
Yeah, that's a good word
And
for it.
I'd always thought that music really had no color and no barriers like that, but it did. Nowadays, it's so much easier. So much easier.
If you look at the blues scene, especially, it seems to be mostly dominated by white players.
Yeah, and they all wear hats.
Yes.
It's like obligatory to wear a hat. You can't play the blues without a hat.
Why wouldn't? Do you have an idea of why black musicians don't pursue the blues? Or, I mean, it's not like it's a great way to make a living,
No.
I suppose, but I think there's something beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's some major social issues. The black musicians want to move beyond that image.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd heard a great joke. Remember that Robert Johnson, the legendary guitar player who went down to the crossroads at midnight, sold his soul to Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a dyslexic blues player who decided that he was going to do the same thing. So he went down the crossroads at midnight and sold his soul to Santa.
And he probably had better luck.
Yeah, it was courtesy of Garrison Keillor.
I see. It does sound like it.
Uh,
Okay, so how did you land with Maynard Ferguson?
I was playing a club called Maynard in Copenhagen, and this English trumpet player came in and asked if he could sit in, and it turned out he was Maynard's lead trumpet player, and he was just on vacation in Copenhagen, and he said, Maynard's going to be looking for a baritone player soon, because the baritone player doesn't want to tour anymore. So he said, if you're interested, I'll give Maynard your info. So this was in the days when people sent telegrams. So I got a telegram from Maynard saying, Alan Downey told me about you and send me a tape. So I sent a tape, and the first track on it was My Funny Valentine, which happened to be Maynard's wife's favorite tune.
Nice goal.
And so then I got another telegram saying, can you be in London on such and such a date? And we'll be going to the States in 3 weeks. So I said, okay, a door opens, do you want to zoom through it?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd also got my first mention in Downbeat when I was in Copenhagen, because they used to have international rankings, like a big column, and it mentioned that, put my name in that I was playing at Montmartre, which was another bizarre thing about Copenhagen. My first newspaper interview, I picked up the paper, this guy came and interviewed me, and I picked up a copy of the paper, it's all in Danish, and got a picture of me, and in the next column is a picture of Lee Morgan, and the headline was, Lee Morgan is skudt i New York. Skudt means shot. And so I appeared in this paper the same day that they discovered that Lee Morgan got shot on the bandstand by his wife. So
You still have that?
No, I don't. It's probably somewhere deep in my archive, somewhere in New Zealand or Australia somewhere. But
gee, wow.
Yes.
Timing.
Oh yeah.
In retrospect, like when a gig like that happens, you meet somebody and then you get the call. Do you quibble about money?
No. My parents had always said to me, because well, there was a huge recession in New Zealand, with gasoline was rationed and all this kind of stuff, and a lot of people were unemployed. And when I was of employable age, my parents said, if you get a job, just be thankful you've got the job, work out the money later. And so Maynard was fine with me. He was picking up the hotels, which was a huge thing. And I was able to save quite a lot of money with Maynard. And I lived pretty thriftily on the road, and I approached it as a tourist, so I wouldn't go crazy. So I was taking pictures all over the place, and I'd sometimes rent a car if we were in town for a couple of days and go out and see sights, and taking the local car, which was nice. But
was it easier at that time regarding immigration and visas and all that than it is now?
My whole immigration thing was very odd. I came in on an H2 visa, which means you with the arts. But I could stay for 3 months. Then I had to go back, tag England, and then come back. So I could go back, get my passport stamped in England, and get back on the next flight, come back. And then I decided that I wanted to do a green card route. And so I got a Social Security card. I was doing that. I was paying taxes. And so I got a lawyer in New York, an immigration lawyer. And I don't think this guy was particularly good, because it took me nearly 3 years from the time I engaged this lawyer until I actually got the call that had been approved. And the laws were changing all the time, constantly, no matter, depending on who was, or which party was in power. For a while, people were getting married to American citizens in order to hurry it along. And then the next administration said anybody who's married to an American citizen who's not a citizen has to go back to their home country and wait. And so a lot of people were just leaving. New Zealand being part of the immigration department's Asian quota, there were a lot of people from the end of the Vietnam War who were coming in as refugees. And for me to go back to New Zealand and get on the back end of the line would have meant that it would have been over. So I asked this guy to, pull whatever strings he could. And eventually I got a call. I was in Milwaukee with Woody Herman, and the lawyer called me at the hotel, and he said, "You better get to New York in the morning. You've got an immigration hearing." Oh my God! So I got a red-eye flight to New York, and the guy met me, and we zoomed over to the immigration department, because I'd been approved already. I had that, at least. I knew it was going to happen, but just the formality of going before a judge. So this guy's nervous, he's smoking cigarettes, and said, "Now listen, they're going to ask you all kinds of questions. Have you ever consorted with prostitutes? Have you ever been around anyone where they're smoking marijuana?" And I said, "Oh, come on." And he's pacing up and down. I'm calm as anything. So I assured him that everything was fine. I mean, I had a wonderful reference letter from Clark Terry, who I'd played with. I mean, it was just glowing. It was beautiful. So this guy's going to be an asset for American music. So we went up and met in the judge's chambers. And the judge was a black lady, 50-ish, very nice. And she came out and she looked at my papers and she said, "Oh, you're playing with Woody Herman?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, Does he play Wood Sharpen's ball?" And I said, "Oh yes, every night." And she said, "Wow, I used to dance with him in college." And was stamped, "There you go." And the lawyer said, "Why didn't you tell me you had this kind of clout?" And I said, "I've been telling you for 3 years." So then I got on a plane and went to Canada, because Woody was in Canada the next night.
Wow, that's cool.
So that's
nice.
So it was good. But,
what did you learn from those guys, Maynard or Woody? I mean, beyond the music.
I learned about working a crowd. Maynard didn't play on everything. He said you can only amaze people once.
Mhm.
So that's why he surrounded himself with young players who could play, who would build it, and he would build a following for each of his prime soloists. So people would come to see you, as well as Maynard. And because Maynard didn't really play hard on everything. It was just a few things, and he would space it just beautifully. And he just was a very personable guy, and the audiences really loved him, and that was great. He could whip up a crowd to a frenzy in a flash. It was wonderful.
Mm.
Woody was fiscally irresponsible, unfortunately.
Mhm.
He was taken advantage of by a lot of people, and in fact, I think Artie Shaw bought his house so that Woody wouldn't have to lose it.
Yeah, he was like deeply in debt to the
Oh,
government.
horrible. But he would do things where he would drop us in a bus at some ratty hotel, and then he'd go on to live at a much higher up the food chain type hotel. But
All of a sudden
he
you're
wasn't
paying dues.
nearly as bad as Buddy Rich.
Ah.
Because Buddy would not pay his guys for 3-4 weeks, so they were all indebted to him because they wanted the extra the money that they'd already earned. And yet, some of the greatest players in the world have come out of the Buddy Rich school of boot camp, and they all loved him. They all loved him, and they all admired and respected him, even though he did stomp on them a little bit.
Mm-hmm. That include Don Menza?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Menza, Pat LaBarbera,
Yeah.
Bobby Shue, tons of Ernie Watts.
Really?
All those guys came out of that school.
Wow. I guess if you can survive that, then
Everything's
it puts
easy
it-
after that.
It puts things in perspective.
Yeah, he offered it to me, I think 3 times, and I turned him down 3 times because I was doing other stuff. But a guy who used to follow me around all the time, his name was Jay Craig, Scottish baritone player, had been going to Berkeley, and he used to dog my footsteps no matter where I was. Copped all my licks. Got on Buddy's band playing on my licks.
Wow. You know, there's a little, now that you're at Fredonia, there's a little Fredonia story with Buddy Rich. He came to play a concert, and this would have been probably 72.
Mhm.
And his piano player was either ill or whatever. They had no piano player that night. And Najee Allen Gums,
Oh yeah, I know, Najee.
well, he was still a student here, and he played the whole concert with him. And Buddy Rich offered him the gig right on the bandstand in the big hall in King Hall. And of course, all of us were going, take it.
Yeah,
Because that was our dream.
that's right.
And here's one of our own being asked, and he didn't take it. I think he was too, I think he was smart. He was too gentle a soul to, he could not have handled any of that.
Yeah, 'cause the Buddy Rich survivors are pretty tough guys. They're really, personality-wise, they're pretty bombastic.
Well, I have a couple the different sides of what you do, and I just wanted to This is live, right?
Yep. 8 o'clock in the morning.
This was 8 o'clock in the morning?
Yep. Maynard had some major tooth surgery. Had part of his jaw taken out.
Oh.
His dentist was traveling with him to make sure that he didn't play. So for the first 2 weeks of this tour, Maynard didn't play a note. We played in Boston the night before until about 2 in the morning. Then we drove to New York. Obviously, nobody slept. And we went into this club, Jimmy's, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and set up a little sound check, and then straight into it. And everything on that recording was live, one take. And when we opened up with Blue Birdland, the deal was Maynard was going to overdub later, and we were playing the theme, and all of a sudden Maynard grabbed his horn, went, "Pew!" and the dentist's face went white. And Maynard played with no warm up, strong as I'd ever heard him, and the man was amazing.
Talk about adrenaline.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I think Thad Jones and Mel Lewis, they did a record like that with Joe Williams, where they were up all night and they just went and did the studio.
Yeah, sometimes you get that momentum building up to that moment. Whereas if you go in, you've had breakfast and everything's calm, so well, good morning everybody, and you have a coffee, and then you go in, the spirit is not there.
Yes. But you do a cool thing here. That slap tongue.
Yes.
I
learned it from.
That's great. To get some tone to go with it, I think is hard.
The mouthpiece I was using on that was a Meyer 10, and I was using number 5 reeds. Of course, in my declining years, I've gone down one strength in reeds.
Yes, that's not bad to go down. Wow, that's very great.
But yeah, this old guy in New Zealand showed me how to slap tongue. His name was Maxwell Stewart, and he was a baritone player from England who'd come to New Zealand and started a jewelry store. And he had been a professional musician in England, and he'd recorded all of Rudy Wiedoft's material, but on baritone. So he did Oodles of Noodles and Saxophobia and all those old corny things. And he showed me how to do this slap tongue thing. And it's not about hitting it here, it's about hitting it back and down, like right off the roof of your mouth. So you have the reed in there, so you're shutting the reed, and then the pressure behind it as you open the reed pops it, and you have just enough power to go through and make the tip of the reed vibrate.
Wow, very cool. I gotta try it when I get And then there's the, I think this was a nice contrast to I think this is you. I think you sent this to me. I could be mistaken.
Oh no, that one's not me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll send you a different one.
Didn't you send me some string? Yeah, you sent me some string stuff. Yeah.
And this is something I started in college because ever since I came to Fredonia. What was strange when I came to Fredonia because FJE was still there, but they had their musicality had dropped to the point where they would sit on stage and play Chameleon for 20 minutes.
This was what year now?
2001.
Yeah.
And the rest of the people who weren't soloing were sitting on the stand like this, or they're bored, or
Did the administration know that was happening?
I think so, and I think I was hired to bring some structure to the FJE. However, the FJE thought that I was there to destroy them and take it out of being their exclusive club and Main Street. And I wasn't there to do that at all. I started out with 14 kids who were brand new freshmen. We slammed a band together and played a concert three weeks after I started in the library, which kind of shocked everybody, but it got everybody's attention. But it took me nearly 4 years before the FJE stopped hating me.
You know, that's, I heard that through because I graduated in '72. FJE was a big part of our lives, and when I heard that, at first I was astonished, and then I started to think about it, and I said, well, when we were there, we were all student-run. They gave us this faculty advisor, and we always used to moan and bitch about you know,
The
nobody's teaching
gorilla in the
anything
room.
new. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think we had a lot of pride in the fact that we were doing this thing.
Oh yeah.
So I can see how the students might think, oh, now they're gonna take it away from us. And
Right.
so I can see
Except
that was-
nobody asked me.
Nobody,
None of the FJE came to me
wow.
and asked me. In fact, they would pointedly, if I was walking down the hallway and if somebody was coming the other way, they would either turn or they would get up as far away from me as possible. And it was just rude. And so I put up with that for about 4 years until most of these people who were the instigators had graduated. And now probably about 98% of the FJE have had interactions with me on in the curricular bands, and we're sharing our repertoires. The FJE come to me and say, oh, do you have such and such a chart? Can I borrow it? I said, sure, here you go. And they'll play it. And likewise, if they've got something great in their library that I'd like to borrow, I just go ask if I can borrow it, and then give it back to them. And so I think we're becoming more of colleagues than than adversaries. So I'm very happy with the way it is, and so I'm faculty advisor. I'm one of the faculty advisors for the FJE and for the two big bands that they have. And it's good because we interact, but I don't go and actually rehearse them, because if I did that, then their status as a student-run group would have been taken away, and they would lose all their funding. So I've been very supportive of them. Whenever I do a concert with the curricular band, I'll always advertise the fact that come and hear the FJE when they play.
Nice.
So I think we've broken down that barrier to the point where it's all very positive now.
That's good. And your title as a curricular jazz, do you teach people how to run a jazz band?
Yes.
Well, that's important. You know,
Yes.
because for years, I mean, almost every high school, junior high, has a jazz band now, but a lot of teachers have no idea. Like,
I have teachers calling me, people who graduated, and they'll call me and say, I'm supposed to run this jazz ensemble, and I've got 9 alto players, what do I do? And so I give them a little formula for doing that.
what is the formula for that?
Don't double the lead alto player. Double the second,
Yeah.
put an alto player with a baritone,
Oh,
the octaves apart, and you might have to transpose a tenor part.
right.
So you can do that, and then you get the full spread of sound.
Yeah.
Even how to set up a saxophone section correctly. So it's first alto, second alto, first tenor, second tenor, baritone. Because that's the way the chord is voiced. And if you put 2 tenor players together, then you get the kind of symphonic lag, how you're waiting for your stand partner to play.
Oh.
And
Oh. Say that again. That's interesting.
in symphony orchestras, when you have 2 people on a stand, invariably somebody is going to downbow. The other person could be a fraction behind. And oftentimes they'll wait for their stand partner to make the move. And this way, if you have the tenor players, they're not playing notes that clash up against each other. They're spread down the line, physically spread.
That's interesting because we were discussing that this morning. Well, where do you want to sit? You want to put the tenors together? And it's not because I knew this thing, but I said, let's not. Let's put, you know.
And you stack the lead players, trumpet, trombone, and alto, kind of in the middle of the section. And then you have the baritone and bass trombone together, because oftentimes they're playing lines together.
Yeah.
And the lead tenor player and the second trumpet player are generally the soloists who come out to the mic, so they're closest to the rhythm section.
Yeah. Have you ever set the band up? I mean,
Oh, like the Kenton flying
Yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Yes, I have. And in fact, we've been rehearsing recently where I have the trumpets facing this way,
Yeah.
the trombones facing this way, and the saxes facing the trumpets.
good idea.
Just so that you can do it. I've also set them up when the trombones are in front, trumpets in the middle and the saxes in the back, which is the Peter Herbolzheimer band in Germany does that.
Wow.
So they have the saxes on a riser.
Is it hard to teach piano players and guitarists especially what to do in a big band?
Yes. Yes, it really is. A lot of them get so locked onto the part, and we have no jazz piano instructors at Fredonia. The piano studio cannot interpret chords. So I'm trying to do that, even though I'm not a piano player. I mean, with a gun to my head, I'm not a piano player, but I can voice and I can use the keyboards and writing thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as comping, piano players don't know how to comp. They think they have to play everything all the time. And I remember a clinic that Thad Jones did. Somebody asked me, what's the role of the piano player? So I said, went over and sat on the piano stool and counted off the band, and he went, sat on his hands. The pianist is there mostly as a soloist or to keep things on track if there's a lull in what the brass and saxes are doing, just to kind of keep the chords straight. But my whole thing is that the bass player is the timekeeper, because they're playing four to the bar. The drummer is the time enhancer, and their job is to signal when the kicks are coming from the brass, or just to kind of get underneath the soloist and help. And that's been pretty good. But a lot of the soloists don't realize how important the rhythm of soloing is. And I'm trying to get them to work off the right cymbal, like the pattern, ding, ding, da, ding, ding, da, ding. If you're playing and the kids are all going ta 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 ta, they overtongue. The minute I hear half note triplets which drag over a bar, I know this kid is lost completely. But I tried something last Monday. It's like watching a person drowning. Well, they'll either go into this or they'll just go, blah, 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 which means they don't have a clue. But I tried something which I thought was kind of random, but I had a lot of kids soloing for the very first time. And I asked each of them to say their name to me, because every person's name has a rhythm to it. And I've got a little trumpet player whose name is Jody White, which is 3 syllables, Joe D. White. So I added 2 notes. I said, okay, your phrase is going to be, here comes Jody White, 5 notes. So I said, do, dum, dum, do, da. And I said, you can play this on any tune, but I said, as long as you keep playing that rhythm. She walked through day by day, fine. Just absolutely fine. And I said, all you have to do, when this chord comes up, you have to move it from a C down a step to a B flat, and it'll sound just fine.
Nice.
And it was great. Light bulbs were going on over people's heads, and it was something I used before, but pretty much for myself. I mean, if I'm playing someplace and I'm getting bored, I can look at somebody and think the word phrase of, that's the ugliest dress I've ever seen. or bad day at the beauty salon.
Yeah.
And you can do that, and people don't realize it, but it becomes personal because you're playing phrases that work with the rhythm section. Rather than, it's not about the soloist. The soloist is the glue that holds everything together, because you got the bass player playing 4 and shaping where the chords go. The pianist is comping, well, almost like that backward Charleston rhythm, dum, bump, dum, bump. So it's incomplete. The drummer is dropping bombs and doing things. It's an incomplete thing until the soloist comes on and plays. And I said to the soloist, we expect the rhythm section, the pianist and the bass player, to be playing the correct notes, the correct chords. They expect you to be playing the correct notes too. I said, you can't just blindly go off at a tangent and expect the rhythm section to respect you.
So there's wrong notes in jazz, or,
Oh yeah.
well,
Although you're only a half step away from the right one
okay.
at any time.
That's because I have to admit, I've been asking that question a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And some people immediately say, if I phrase it, are there wrong notes in improvising? They'll say no. Most of them will then qualify that statement. But I'm pretty much with you. I think, yes, there's wrong notes, but there's ways to deal with them. But a lot of the younger
There are
players
degrees of wrongness
are
too.
going at it from the other way. No, there's wrong notes as long as you resolve them, as long as you play them with attitude, as long as you know you're playing
Yeah, and you know the
an
scales.
encore tone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to assume that, well, fill in the blank. If you were to say, I am X% self-taught for yourself,
80.
80%.
Mostly because there was no music education in schools in New Zealand when I was growing up. And my clarinet teacher at the time had said, well, I'd asked him about chords, and he said, well, jazz musicians just play by ear. So I said, okie dokie, I went away and played by ear for a long time.
So now that you're in academia, and how much do you embrace jazz improv methods and terms and modes and enclosures and all that?
I try to put on a very practical, hands-on method. Harry Jacobson is focusing on that, and my thing is to take what he's given them and put in here and then put it on the instrument, so it's practical and they become employable.
Oh, what a great statement.
That's,
I mean, it seems so obvious to me, but I don't think it always is, especially in this day and age. That, I mean, there's so much. Where are all these musicians
oh yeah,
going to go?
that's right, because the big music schools are cranking out people like crazy, and the people in New York who are employers in clubs realize that they can get people cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to play music in their clubs until you got people playing for nothing.
Or paying to play.
Absolutely, and I won't do that. And one of the reasons I started a string group was I want the string players, for that small percentage who do get picked up by major orchestras and are earning a paycheck with a major orchestra, to be able to interpret the oddities of jazz phrasing and pick up another paycheck from the other side of the street. And so I'm teaching people how to phrase running eighth notes with the underlying 12/8 feel, and the oddities of chordal placement, and the chord voicings, so that the clashes don't become foreign or frightening to them. Because a lot of things that people are doing for strings, and I work a lot with the Buffalo Philharmonic, is these major acts will come in and the string parts are dumbed down so hard, whereas they can do some beautiful stuff. Things like John Williams has written, or Alan Broadbent has written, things which do have a bit of a technical challenge, which creates interest within the string section. And once you have a bunch of people interested in backing up the front person, you really get that support. And I started the strings kind of as a selfish move, but I've always loved playing with strings, and nobody was doing it. Nobody's playing jazz with strings, and the only things that I found out that publishers have is Beatles medley for beginner strings, and this is stuff that their grandparents listened to. They're not familiar with the Beatles at all. They listen to a whole other bunch of things. So I'm trying to bring some different things. We do we do some good standards, we do some ballads, we do some Brazilian things, and some kind of soft rock pop things.
And how many do you have?
10 strings.
Nice.
And I use first, second, third violins, like Charlie Parker's stuff. Nowadays it's usually first and second and then violas.
Yeah.
But I have 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 2 thirds, 2 violas, 2 cellos. And then piano, bass, drums, guitar. And I'll send you a track of Beautiful where I had a singer, and I don't play on it, but I wrote a viola solo for this kid because you don't hear viola solos too often. And he was thrilled to come up front, play it, and the applause was deafening, and he would have this big smile. He's like, oh my God, is this what this were? But they're relaxed on stage when they play this stuff with me. I kind of take a glance, and the cellos are grooving.
Nice.
It's really delightful.
And you're writing with a pencil and paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm having to do it all because there's nothing out there that's been published. There was a great writer by the name of Calvin Custer, who was a Syracuse Symphony's musical director. I had a couple of his things, and when I first started writing, that was the model I was taking. Him, Alan Broadbent, Klaus Ogerman.
Mm-hmm.
And he was using 3 violins as well. Mm-hmm. And the sound that he got and the strength that he got, it was just a huge, big warm layer of sound, which was just so nice.
Nice. Are you upbeat or downbeat? No puns intended. About this where jazz lives in our culture now.
I'm a little bit down on it, I think. I think there's a lot of ego out there that jazz musicians are making recordings, and they're very difficult to sit down and enjoy. They're so intellectually ahead of the audience that a lot of audiences are going, later for this, and they're walking away. In fact, I saw this happen. I was playing at a jazz festival in Boise, Idaho. Michael Brecker was the headliner. Michael was brilliant. He had Joey Calderazzo on piano, Reginald Veals on bass, and Jeff Watts on drums. And he was playing all the stuff from Tales of the Hudson, which had yet to come out. And from the end of his first tune, and for the rest of his concert, there was a constant stream of people walking out, because he was playing intellectually so far above what people had been listening to, that it was difficult for them to follow. And I've always been like a more slowed down, working on sound rather than technique kind of person. Mm-hmm. You can say more with your sound. You don't have to play 1,000 notes. You're not getting paid by the note. But if you can play the sound and reach the audience and tell the story, because you're still a story. I play saxophone because I'm a lousy singer. And
I think that's a really interesting statement, because it says you are trying to get your message out like a singer. Mm-hmm. Singers have the benefit and the burden of the words sometimes.
Yes. And our job is to relate that to the audience, so that they can feel if there's anger, or if there's pathos, if there's whatever emotion that we're trying to throw at them from the stage, or joy or sorrow, that the audience can feel this at the same time. And I have this kid who's a great tenor player, who's at Fredonia. He's a freshman. No, he's a sophomore now. Came as a freshman. Could play like Bob Mintzer. He rips over it. Extensions, everything. But I'm trying to get his softer side in. So I found in the FJE office a John Menza chart of My One and Only Love, with flutes, clarinets. This year I have saxophone players who can double, which is fantastic. So I ran this out for him. He played such an aggressive solo. It was, I said, this would be like, you know, on a date with your girlfriend in the car, and you grab her by the shirt, and he's like, I love you, damn it! I said, she'd be out of the car in a heartbeat if you were doing that. I said, you've got to put some tenderness into it, and realize what the lyrics are. So so I told him, look at the lyrics, play the lyrics, and tell the story that way. And also telling the vocalist the same thing. Phrase it as if you're speaking. And something I do with vocalists is, before they sing it, I'll have them just stand there and talk it to me. Just tell me the story in my ear. And then when I believe that they are believing the story, then we get the microphone and then we start singing it. And then they have an understanding of what's going on.
Boy, sounds like you're doing really good stuff. The tape's gonna run out pretty soon, but I wanted to go back. You said the magic word to me early on, and I'm a huge Cannonball fan, and I always have been. And I wonder, well, why are you?
I got the feeling of absolute joy when he played. It was life, it was joy, it was, come on, let's do it. And that's what I tried to bring. And I figured, rather than just, you know, slugging over the patterns and things, I'm going to bring some kind of joy to what's played. And I actually got to meet him a little before he passed away. We were playing at McCormick Place in Chicago, and I did the ugly fan thing. So, oh, I've copped all your licks. I've listened to all your albums, and he said, oh, that's great. He said, well, I've heard you too, because he had the Live at Jimmy's album, and so he said, do you get a solo? And I said, yeah, at the end of the set. And he said, I'll be there. And so I got up to play, got the Spirit thing, and all of a sudden my peripheral vision, I noticed Cannonball sliding into the wings, and he stayed there until the end. So he heard the whole thing, and when we were done, I walked upstairs. He wasn't there anymore, and I ran into him again. He was coming up the hallway, doing a walking interview with a bunch of reporters. And he just kept on talking, but he reached out, grabbed my hand, gave me a thumbs up. That.
Nice.
I was unapproachable for a week.
Yes.
And I was very, very sad when he died.
Really, me too. And Nat, and the whole thing was just perfect.
Yeah.
The way he took soul jazz and infused it with his personality.
Yeah.
The way he talked to the crowd and
yeah, he was very folksy, but very bright guy, former school teacher.
Yeah, and that sound, you know, I kid my students. I said, I'm not going to play for you the greatest note ever played, and I play the build up to Mercy in Mercy Mercy when it goes da 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 da.
Yep.
And he plays that note, and it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it's.
Well, I have the exact model mouthpiece that he has. He had a New York Meyer High Rover 5, which I use on alto. I use the same strength rays that he used, and I have a King Super 20 alto.
Do you know, when he switched horns, I noticed it on his records. He started playing Selmers at some point.
A different sound.
Yeah, and I said, maybe he was getting free instruments or something.
Yeah, it could be. He changed mouthpieces a couple of times too.
Yeah, he was a great guy. Well, this has been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you.
And I knew it was going to be. I just had a feeling that this was going to be great. Did you ever take a globe and draw your path? You know, because I think that's.
No, I didn't.
I think you should, because I think it's really interesting. You know, Australia, England, France, over, and then you're here, and now you're near Fredonia.
Well, the one that I saw was Flip Phillips. He had a tenor, and he had engravings on the bell and the bow. It had a little bus and a little airplane and
Cute.
a little railroad train, and he had dates on all of these things, so he had his whole life on the horn.
Yeah. Great.
But I'm having a wonderful time, and I couldn't think of a better way to have done it.
Great. Well, on that positive note, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Over and out.